30,000 feet in the air, there is no such thing as a minor mechanical issue. You cannot pull an airplane over to the side of a cloud to check the engine, and you cannot negotiate with gravity when a turbine fails mid-flight. I am a Lead Aviation Maintenance Inspector. My entire career is built on a single, terrifying responsibility: deciding whether a commercial airliner is safe enough to carry 300 souls across an ocean. In the aviation industry, a plane does not fly because the pilot turns the key. It flies because my signature is stamped on the official airworthy release document. Without my authorization, a $100 million aircraft is nothing more than a very expensive paperweight sitting on the tarmac. For 7 years, I managed the primary maintenance hub for a rapidly expanding budget airline. We operated a massive fleet of narrow-body jets, flying highly congested domestic and international routes. It was a stressful job, but we had a flawless safety record because my engineering team never cut corners. That all changed when the board of directors hired a new chief executive officer named Marcus. Marcus did not come from an aviation background. He came from the world of discount retail supermarkets. He didn't understand aerodynamics, metal fatigue, or federal safety mandates. He only understood profit margins, daily turnaround times, and aggressive cost cutting. To Marcus, our sophisticated fleet of commercial jets were just flying buses, and he viewed my maintenance department not as a crucial safety net, but as a massive financial drain on his quarterly bonuses. Almost immediately, Marcus began demanding impossible turnaround times. He wanted planes landed, inspected, refueled, and back in the air in under 40 minutes. When I told him that a proper pre-flight hydraulic inspection took at least an hour, he accused me of being a lazy, bureaucratic obstacle. He started holding weekly executive meetings where he would scream at the maintenance supervisors, demanding we find ways to slash the budget by 20% before the upcoming winter holiday season, which was our most profitable and dangerous time of the year. I held my ground, shielding my team from his insane demands and refusing to approve any aircraft that hadn't been thoroughly vetted. But Marcus was determined to inflate the company's stock price by any means necessary. He realized he couldn't bully me into ignoring the rulebook, so he decided to quietly bypass me altogether, making a decision that would ultimately doom his entire empire. The pressure in the maintenance hangar reached a boiling point just 3 weeks before the massive Thanksgiving and Christmas travel rush. The winter weather patterns were already putting severe stress on the airframes, and our backlog of scheduled maintenance was growing dangerously long. Marcus had implemented a draconian new policy. Any aircraft delayed in the hangar for more than 12 hours would result in immediate pay docking for the assigned mechanical crew. It was a blatant violation of our union contracts, but Marcus knew that tying up the dispute in legal arbitration would take months, while the intimidation tactic worked instantly. Exhausted mechanics were rushing through checklists, fueled by stale coffee and the fear of losing their holiday bonuses. I spent my days walking the hangar floor, personally double-checking as many critical systems as I could, terrified that someone was going to miss a fatal flaw in the rush to meet Marcus's impossible deadlines. It was during the graveyard shift that the devastating truth finally surfaced, discovered by one of the sharpest junior technicians on my team. His name was Kenchik, a bright young man with short, dark hair and an obsessive attention to detail that you rarely see in junior mechanics. I had personally mentored him because he had a habit of noticing things that older, more complacent engineers often overlooked. That night, Kenchik was tasked with performing a routine teardown and inspection of a high-pressure turbine on one of our oldest jet engines. This specific engine component operates under unimaginable stress, spinning at tens of thousands of revolutions per minute while being blasted by superheated exhaust gases. The titanium alloy blades inside the turbine have to be manufactured to microscopic tolerances, and they are rigorously tracked by the Federal Aviation Administration from the moment they are forged to the moment they are installed. Around 3 in the morning, Kenchik walked into my glass-walled office holding a single turbine blade wrapped in a microfiber cloth. He looked pale. He placed the heavy metal blade on my desk and handed me a jeweler's magnifying loupe. At first glance, the blade looked completely normal, polished and ready for installation. But when I looked closely at the base, my blood ran cold. The mandatory micro-engraved FAA certification stamp was missing. Instead, there was a crude, laser-etched serial number that didn't align with our official manufacturer database. Kenchik quietly explained that he had checked the entire newly arrived shipment in the supply room. Marcus hadn't just ordered a few cheap replacement parts. He had secretly authorized the purchase of over 200 counterfeit gray market turbine blades from an unverified overseas supplier to save millions of dollars in maintenance overhead. Installing counterfeit parts in a commercial jet engine is not just a policy violation. It is a severe federal crime. These cheap blades were not forged to withstand the extreme temperatures of flight, and if even one of them shattered midair, it would act like shrapnel, shredding the engine and potentially ripping a hole straight through the passenger cabin. Kenchik had immediately red-tagged the entire shipment and locked the supply cage, grounding the 3 aircraft scheduled to receive the fake parts. Unfortunately, Marcus was conducting a surprise early morning inspection of the hangar when the red tags went up. When Marcus found out a junior mechanic had just grounded 3 of his most profitable planes over paperwork issues, he completely lost his mind. He marched right up to Kenchik, screamed that he was a paranoid amateur costing the company hundreds of thousands of dollars a day, and fired the young man on the spot, ordering airport security to drag him out of the hangar into the freezing rain. I didn't even wait for Marcus to return to the executive suites. I intercepted him right there on the hangar floor, stepping between him and the security guards who were escorting Kenchik away. I had the counterfeit turbine blade in my hand, and I held it up directly in Marcus's face. I told him, loud enough for the entire morning shift to hear, that Kenchik was absolutely right, and that the parts he had secretly ordered were illegal, uncertified junk. I explained that installing them wasn't just a violation of internal company policy, it was a severe breach of federal aviation law that would inevitably result in a catastrophic mid-air failure. Marcus just glared at me, his face turning a dangerous, volatile shade of crimson. He ordered the guards to continue physically removing Kenchik from the property and demanded that I follow him into the glass-walled supervisor's office immediately. Once the office door clicked shut, the illusion of corporate professionalism completely vanished. Marcus didn't even attempt to deny the origins of the turbine blades. Instead, he aggressively doubled down on his decision. He told me that the so-called gray market blades were manufactured in the exact same overseas factories as the official ones, just without the expensive, bureaucratic FAA certification stamps. He claimed his creative procurement strategy was saving the airline over $12 million in a single quarter, money that was desperately needed to keep the company competitive during the brutal holiday price wars. He explicitly ordered me to unlock the supply cage, distribute the unverified parts to the mechanics, and personally sign the airworthy release forms for the 3 grounded aircraft before noon. When I flatly refused, citing the strict federal aviation regulations, he laughed coldly and told me the regulations were just archaic red tape designed to strangle innovative businesses. He leaned over the desk, placing his hands flat on the glass, and delivered his final ultimatum. He told me that I was either a corporate team player who understood the harsh financial realities of the modern aviation business, or I was an unemployed liability. I looked him dead in the eye and told him that my signature was the only thing keeping his cheap aircraft from raining shredded metal over heavily populated neighborhoods, and I would never sell my engineering integrity to pad his holiday bonus. Marcus didn't blink. He officially terminated my employment right there on the spot. He demanded my corporate ID, my hangar access codes, and my secure maintenance tablet. He then smirked and informed me that he had already anticipated my rigid inflexibility. He had secretly flown in a regional maintenance manager, a notorious corporate yes-man who had previously been investigated for pencil-whipping safety checks, to serve as the new acting lead inspector. The new manager was already standing right outside the office door, holding a clipboard and waiting to eagerly rubber stamp the counterfeit parts into the engines. Marcus leaned in close and threatened that if I said a single word to the FAA, the Transportation Safety Board, or the press, his army of corporate lawyers would bury me in defamation lawsuits until I was entirely bankrupt and permanently unemployable. I didn't scream, I didn't argue, and I didn't throw a tantrum. I calmly handed over my keys and my identification badge. I packed a small cardboard box with my personal items, gave a final silent nod to my stunned mechanical crew, and walked out of the hangar into the freezing morning rain. Marcus genuinely thought he had won. He thought he had successfully removed the only obstacle standing between his greed and the sky. He fundamentally misunderstood how absolute Federal Aviation Authority actually works. I didn't drive to a local news station, and I didn't waste my time calling a labor lawyer. The moment I got to my apartment, I brewed a fresh cup of dark roast coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened my personal laptop. Marcus genuinely thought he had confiscated all the evidence when he aggressively demanded my secure company tablet. But as a senior lead inspector, my federal credentials weren't tied to a piece of corporate plastic. They were registered directly with the Department of Transportation. More importantly, before I had marched out to confront Marcus on the hangar floor, I had taken several highly detailed, high-resolution photographs of the crude, laser-etched serial numbers on the counterfeit turbine blade that Kenchik had found. There is a highly classified emergency reporting system within the Federal Aviation Administration specifically designed for catastrophic safety breaches. It is directly tied to the AOG, or Aircraft On-Ground Protocol. It is not a suggestion, a polite warning, or a request for a routine future inspection. When a federally certified lead inspector triggers an AOG alert citing the active installation of unapproved counterfeit engine components, the government does not send a courteous email asking the airline for clarification. They treat the situation with the exact same severity as an active domestic terrorism threat. I logged into the secure federal portal, uploaded the high-resolution photographs of the fake serial numbers, and attached a sworn, legally binding affidavit. I detailed the exact hangar location, the specific engine models being compromised, and Marcus's explicit verbal orders to install the gray market parts. I hit submit, closed my laptop, and went to sleep, knowing exactly what kind of hell was going to break loose when the sun came up. The next morning was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, historically the absolute busiest, most chaotic, and most profitable travel day of the entire year in the United States. Marcus's budget airline had over 400 fully booked flights scheduled, preparing to carry roughly 60,000 passengers across the country. The new compliant maintenance manager had ruthlessly pushed the mechanical crew through the night, rubber stamping the counterfeit blades into the engines and frantically signing the airworthy release forms just as Marcus had ordered. By 6:30 in the morning, the first massive wave of 30 fully loaded commercial jets was already pushing back from the gates, taxiing onto the active runways at major international airports from New York to Los Angeles. Marcus was likely sitting in his sprawling executive office with a cup of premium espresso, watching the digital departure boards light up green across his monitors, mentally calculating the massive holiday bonus he was about to secure. He had absolutely no idea that the federal government had already mobilized. He didn't know that the FAA had reviewed my midnight report, verified the missing manufacturer codes, and immediately bypassed local air traffic controllers. At exactly 6:45 in the morning, the Federal Aviation Administration hit the ultimate red button on Marcus's entire empire. The ground stop order was immediate, absolute, and utterly terrifying for the pilots who received it. Air traffic control towers across the country suddenly cut through the routine radio chatter, broadcasting a priority federal directive to every single aircraft operating under Marcus's airline banner. Flights that were actively taxiing on the runways, engines roaring and preparing for takeoff, were ordered to immediately cut power and hold their positions. Flights that had already begun their initial ascent were ordered to level off and immediately return to their origin airports under emergency protocols. Over 400 commercial jets were instantly paralyzed. The entire Skyway air fleet was federally grounded in a matter of seconds. Marcus's executive dashboard, which had been glowing with profitable green departure lights, suddenly turned into a sea of flashing red warnings. His phone began ringing nonstop. Airport managers from across the country were calling, screaming in a panic, demanding to know why federal authorities were suddenly swarming their terminals. Because this wasn't a routine maintenance delay, this was an active criminal investigation. Armed federal marshals, accompanied by FAA enforcement agents, drove their heavily armored vehicles directly out onto the active tarmacs, physically blocking the jets from moving. They boarded the aircraft, bypassing the confused flight attendants, and marched straight into the cockpits to confiscate the plane's official technical logs and maintenance release documents. The scene at the terminals was absolute chaos. Tens of thousands of holiday travelers were suddenly trapped in crowded airports, staring blankly at departure boards that now simply read, "Canceled by federal order." The news networks caught wind of the situation almost immediately. Live helicopters broadcasted the surreal footage of dozens of branded commercial jets sitting motionless on the runways, surrounded by federal law enforcement vehicles with flashing blue lights. By 8 in the morning, the story was the leading headline on every major news channel in the country. The reporters weren't talking about bad weather or pilot strikes. They were explicitly reporting that the budget airline had been caught secretly installing counterfeit, uncertified engine parts to save money. Marcus tried to enact his crisis management protocols, but it was completely useless. You cannot spin federal aviation fraud into a PR victory. The compliant maintenance manager who had rubber-stamped the fake parts was arrested by federal agents right there on the hangar floor, still holding his clipboard. But the government wasn't just interested in the low-level manager. Just before 9 o'clock, 2 black federal SUVs pulled up to the glass doors of the corporate headquarters. Federal agents walked past the stunned receptionists, bypassed the security guards, and kicked open the double mahogany doors of Marcus's executive office. They didn't ask for a meeting, and they didn't care about his expensive lawyers. They aggressively placed Marcus in handcuffs, read him his Miranda rights, and marched the arrogant CEO through his own lobby in front of hundreds of his terrified employees. The financial hemorrhaging that followed was unprecedented in the history of modern commercial aviation. With over 400 aircraft indefinitely grounded during the absolute peak of the holiday travel season, Skyway Air was legally obligated to issue immediate cash refunds for hundreds of thousands of canceled tickets. They were also forced to pay exorbitant compensation fees for the passengers stranded in airport terminals worldwide. But that was merely a drop in the bucket compared to the wrath of the federal government. The FAA officially revoked the airline's operating certificate, permanently barring them from flying any commercial routes. The Department of Transportation levied a massive, crippling fine for every single counterfeit turbine blade found in the engines. When Wall Street opened the following Monday, the airline's stock price didn't just drop, it completely vaporized. Shares plummeted by 95% in a matter of minutes before the SEC intervened and halted trading entirely. Major investors aggressively dumped their holdings, and the company's primary lenders immediately recalled their massive corporate loans. By the end of the week, Skyway Air was forced to file for complete bankruptcy. But unlike a typical corporate restructuring, the courts refused to let the executives walk away with golden parachutes. Because the collapse was triggered by intentional, premeditated criminal acts that threatened thousands of human lives, the federal government pierced the corporate veil. They completely froze the company's remaining assets to ensure every last stranded passenger and unpaid employee received their money. Marcus's expensive team of corporate defense attorneys quietly abandoned him the moment they realized his multi-million-dollar retainers were locked up in frozen bank accounts. He was left sitting in a federal detention center, wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit instead of his custom-tailored suits, facing a staggering list of federal indictments. The charges included wire fraud, criminal conspiracy, and hundreds of counts of reckless endangerment of human life. During the trial, Marcus tried to offer a desperate plea deal, attempting to blame the entire situation on a supply chain misunderstanding and throwing the compliant maintenance manager under the bus. but the federal prosecutors had my meticulous, undeniable documentation, complete with high-resolution photographs and his own verbal orders, recorded by multiple witnesses. The judge showed absolutely zero mercy. He sentenced Marcus to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole, explicitly noting in his closing statement that Marcus's reckless greed would have inevitably resulted in the deaths of thousands of innocent people. The arrogant CEO, who once viewed commercial jets as nothing more than flying piggy banks, was now locked in an 8x10 concrete cell for the rest of his adult life. The spectacular collapse of Skyway Air sent massive shockwaves throughout the entire commercial aviation sector. Every other budget airline in the country immediately panicked, terrified that the Federal Aviation Administration would turn its aggressive, unforgiving spotlight onto their own maintenance logs. Corporate boards realized they desperately needed independent, unbribable experts to ruthlessly audit their fleets and guarantee absolute safety compliance before the federal government decided to conduct a surprise inspection. That was exactly when I officially launched my own independent aviation auditing firm. I didn't have to look very far for my first hire. I brought Kenchik on as my lead diagnostic technician, immediately doubling the salary that Marcus had paid him, and giving him absolute authority to red tag any aircraft he deemed unsafe. Today, we operate the most feared and deeply respected independent aviation auditing agency in the country. Airline executives don't scream at us or threaten our jobs. They practically sweat with anxiety when we walk into their hangars with our clipboards. We set our own hours, command exorbitant consulting fees, and answer to absolutely no one except the immutable laws of physics. Marcus genuinely thought he could build an empire by treating safety as an optional expense and treating his engineers like disposable tools. But in the aviation industry, you cannot fake gravity, and you cannot bribe metal fatigue. He tried to cut corners to protect his bottom line, and instead, he paid for it with his entire company and his freedom. Thank you for watching this full Reddit nuclear revenge story. If you loved hearing how a fired inspector legally grounded an entire airline and sent a corrupt CEO to federal prison, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Have you ever seen an arrogant boss's ego completely destroy their own business? Share your own unsaid stories in the comments down below. Until next time, stay smart, stay quiet, and always trust the math.